Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back into another edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with Phil Putney and myself as we're talking investing, finance, and retirement. And mistakes that couples make is on the docket this go around. Phil, I don't know about you, but my wife and I never argue about
Oh, no, never. We always agree on everything.
Yeah,
so,
especially money.
Yeah, especially money. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
So,
I'm waiting for the lightning strike.
that's right. She's listening. Watch out,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, couples, hey, look, finance and money, it's usually the number one thing. It's the number one divorce issue. It's, it's the number one thing, even for retirees, pre-retirees. It's
absolutely.
Always an argument. So you've been doing this a long time, Phil. You've been helping families many years get to and through retirement. So I thought, hey, let's talk about some of the things you've seen and some of the hats that you wear when it comes to helping folks out.
It's funny you mentioned that, the hat you wear, because we always, not always, but I mean, if it comes up, we, have an interesting discussion. It's like, okay, if we can keep going down this path, I'm going to have to change my hat and I'm going to charge my consultant or my counseling rate, So.
Is it more is counseling costs more than your financial planning? Yeah. So let's talk about a couple things that you've run into, you've seen through the many years when it comes to couples, husbands, wives getting on the same page. Because a lot of times, Phil, the first time, not always, but the first time that they're really truly discussing this might be in front of an advisor, because maybe the dynamic is such that the other always agrees, right? And it's like, well, okay, whatever. Just to kind of, we pick our battles when we're married, right? And so you're like, all right, I'll go along with that. But then maybe in front of you, they're like, I've got this third party person. No, I don't think I'm okay with that. Let's start with one that not many people see much anymore, but if you're still working government or whatever, that's the pension, the spousal benefit option. I've heard a million horror stories about people back in the day. I think now, Phil, if you elect the non-spousal option, I think both parties have to sign off, I believe, but I think it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, if you do a single life only, take a pension lump sum, things like that. Yeah. You got to have it notarized. Your spouse has to sign off saying, okay, I understand. Yeah. You're disinheriting me, so to speak, or whatever the case is. So,
but that didn't used to be the case. So
correct.
Making the wrong choice can really hurt. I mean, and oftentimes we see the big number and we go, well, that's what I want. And you don't think it through. And it's like, I mean, I've heard, I actually just started talking with a new advisor. I've got a new client that I chat with, and her husband, luckily, he almost went that route. And then he passed away unexpectedly early. And she's like, I would have been, and it actually got her to change careers and become a financial advisor and advocate for women because of that. Like it almost derailed her something fierce. So,
and that's great. And I mean, run into that all the time. I've got a client that I'm thinking of now that was the case that, when they came to me, he had already retired, and that's what he did. They ran their budget and said, well, we need this money, and we're going to live both, about the same age, so we're good. So he took single life only. He had the bigger pension. They were both school teachers.
Right.
And it was a couple of years, I was trying to think back, it was a couple of years pre meeting with me where we started doing the planning. Well, and by then, now he had been diagnosed with throat cancer.
Oh, man.
And he had gone through treatments, and I mean, it's in remission and they're, treating it. But I mean, the reality is he probably has a shorter life expectancy than for sure what they were thinking originally.
Yeah.
And now, we're planning for that, trying to make sure that when, he passes, because the chances are very high that he's probably going to predecease her.
Sure. Yeah.
She now have enough knowing that pension is going to be gone.
Yeah. So you've got to talk it through, and you got to make sure that you're making the right option. And that's one place. So there are couples will disagree over it. We don't see it as much, again, because pensions are on their way out, but in the Metro Detroit area, you're definitely still seeing it pretty good. So let's go to number 2. The Social Security claiming strategy. Now, this is not just the turn it on at 62 argument. This is the argument that if you're married, what's the best strategy for both of you? Maybe one goes early, one goes late, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so we teach Social Security classes, Social Security and taxes. I mean, that's one of the pieces that we get into all the time is understanding pros and cons, ages you can file, the concept of break even, how all that plays out. And, as we're going through that, I always tell the class to make sure you understand that concept of break even. It shouldn't just be you individually.
Right.
And more often than not, the case we see is that the higher earning spouse, maybe they're older, maybe they're not in as good of health, as the younger spouse, and they're thinking, well, running the break even, I don't think I'm going to make it to that age. I think I'm only going to live a couple of years beyond that. Forget that. I'm going to get it early. Why would I wait?
Right.
Which, okay, that might sound great for you, but do you now realize that you've, locked in this lower benefit for your surviving spouse that might live 5, 10, 15 years longer than you?
Yeah.
So to your point, you can't look at one spouse by himself. It's got to be, his or her benefit. You got to look at the combined options. Mm-hmm. And even if you are the higher earning spouse and you think you have a shorter life expectancy, very often then it makes sense for you to delay it just because you might not get the benefit, but your spouse would.
Especially if you're the higher income earner. So,
absolutely
crank that number up as high as we can before we wind up, leaving this place. And then because they're going to get the higher of the two. Right. When one person passes. So,
and like we've said many times, there's all these rules of thumb and concepts and, this is what we should do. I'm not saying that if you're the higher earning spouse, you always should delay. Right. No, it's more often than not, that's the right strategy. You've got to understand your specific scenario, run the math, figure it out. What's the right strategy for me and for our scenario.
So we're talking about getting our husbands and wives on the same page here. And surprisingly enough, Phil, this third one kind of is funny to me, but actually, what do you want to do with your actual retirement? Which seems a little odd, but I think we have these general conversations, right? And so again, it takes sitting down in front of someone like yourself before they wind up maybe really getting into the nitty gritty. Because you could easily say, well, he wants to golf and I want to see the grandkids. Okay, that's pretty generic. Well, how often do you want to see the grandkids? Where are the grandkids? Are we flying there? Are we driving there? How often are you playing golf or do you want to play golf? Because once a year is a lot different than once a week.
Right. Which, you've got to start. That's where you start, understanding generally what does it look like, but then you got to start to fine tune it and build that spending plan, to understand, okay, this is what I want.
Right.
What does it take to get that?
Yeah.
And that's where it drives me crazy. Sometimes you see all these rules of thumbs out there, which, for younger people is great, gives them a general direction and encourages savings and things like that. But I was just looking at an article, I think it was on Yahoo Finance, that talked about how much should you have saved at various ages, which, that younger generation, I can get it, 30s, 40s, starts encouraging savings. Awesome idea. Yeah. 50s and 60s, it's still saying, well, and the thing that caught me off guard was looking at age, in your 60s, they said you should have 7 times your earnings saved. I'm like, okay, really? So if you want to spend a similar life, have a similar lifestyle to what you have today, so you've only got 7 years worth of income saved. Now, granted, some of it's going to come from Social Security.
Right.
There's other factors that plays into it, but it's again, back to that general rule of thumb where some people are going to look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, I make 50,000 a year, so I only need 350,000. And, I'm going to take my Social Security early. I don't have a pension. And all of a sudden, I've got this wild dream of retirement and travel, and it just doesn't work.
No, I wonder if they meant to do more like, savings as in like, I don't know, emergency fund or something. Cause that doesn't seem quite.
Yeah. I don't know.
That math is not quite there, but yeah.
But there's no shortcut to putting the hard work in and figuring it out.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in a prior podcast about, putting that off. I don't want to do it. No, the longer you put it off, it doesn't get easier. It just becomes harder and more challenging because you might have missed opportunity.
Well, the problem with a lot of anything with the internet stuff again, and same thing even with our podcast. Okay, you're a CPA, you've been doing this, a personal financial specialist. You've been doing this for 30 plus years, and every situation is different, and things constantly change. And anybody who's read any articles of late that most of the time that are posted on the internet, and even if it's from reputable places, they're hiring people. Half the time, just read some of these and you like the proofreading, you're like, wow, what, so you got to take a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt too, because that's content filler. It's content filler. Yeah.
It's great discussion points. It's a good start. But to me, that's exactly what it is. And I always tell clients as we get into that, I said, there's 2 ways to approach retirement, right? You can look at the general rules of thumb, and it's kind of one of these, right? Oh, yeah, I think I'm about there, and I think it's going to work. Or do you want to really run the numbers and know, okay, yeah, it's going to work, and this is how we're going to do this, and then start walking down the path. making adjustments along the way.
Right.
But at least you have a plan and you understand, and you're making informed decisions.
Well, I think the generalized looking at stuff is great for dinner conversation and
right.
Kind of getting the ball rolling. But that's when, then you take that information, you sit down with somebody like yourself and you say, all right, let's walk through the real details.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
All right. Let's do number 4 here on my list, Phil.
Sure.
Is it important to coordinate? We talked about coordinating a Social Security strategy. Is it important to coordinate individual accounts? So her 401k and, his Roth and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And this is where kind of depends on the scenario with husband and wife and understanding, I guess their relationship. Mm-hmm. A lot of times if husband and wife both have been career individuals and kind of manage things separately,
right,
they're used to that and they want to kind of maintain that in retirement, which is fine if that's what their goal is.
Sure.
We look at it from a household standpoint, still making sure we're coordinating, but then building more individualized plans to what they're trying to do to keep things separate.
Right.
But it really comes down to understanding their scenario. You can't just ignore ones versus the others and have totally separate plans, because at the end of the day, you're not separate, you're married. Mm-hmm. And a lot of things happen together, like filing a tax return, so
right.
All that has to be built in as one. And then you can individualize and kind of customize how that works in the different accounts for husband and wife, because risk tolerance sometimes is different. And there's a lot of different factors that play into those individual accounts. But
yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah. Cause a lot of times we think about, those are separate accounts, right? So It's like, at what point do we start? I guess we're not combining those, right? We're just talking about the strategy of how to deliver the money.
Correct. Yeah. You can't combine them, especially IRAs. They're individual. Right. It's not like we can put them into one account.
Right.
They're definitely individual. We have to maintain them separately. But you can't totally ignore it. I mean, and I've run into this before where, one spouse is maybe the higher earner and they have the majority of the assets, and, the other spouse they've always done their own thing and they don't have as much, but, it's like, well, I'm going to take care of all the major bills. And, then this is the money that spouse needs to live on. And well, they've already filed for Social Security because they needed it. And, they're taking this amount out of the IRA and they're, we don't worry about that. They're okay there. We're looking at this. I'm like, oh, that's great. But what they're doing affects you tax-wise. So we've got to look at the big picture.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of people do divide and conquer.
Right.
I just turned 50. My wife is 45. I pay pretty much all of the major bills, and she does. She does like the insurance payment, the HSA, buys the groceries, that kind of stuff. And so we kind of divide things that way. But to your point, we have kind of an overarching theme, structured plan for what we're going to do.
Right. So, yeah. And I run into that all the time where, a married couple is kind of used to that during working careers of one, you take care of these bills, I'm doing these, and you kind of run that way and you do your own thing. But now you get into retirement. Okay, we need X amount a month. Well, it's coming out of your account.
Yeah,
well, no, it's not.
Yeah, right,
Whose account's it coming out of,
That's a great point. I didn't think about that. We'll have to talk about that, Phil, because I can see here and like, wait a minute. Who's doing what? Yeah.
I thought you were saving for retirement for that.
Well, to the point, that's a great point, though, because I'm self-employed, a small business owner. She is saving more in a retirement account through work than I am, and I'm paying more cash for home upgrades and preparing the house for retirement, right? So there's a million ways that you can do this as a couple, but at the end of the day, you still got to have that an overarching plan that you can work with an advisor who can be clued in on this, so they know what you're doing. And say, okay, well, Mark, if you're spending all your cash, or not all your cash, but if you're spending cash right now to, retirement proof the home, so to speak, get all the upgrades done ahead of time before I turn 60. Great. She's putting money away in the, the HSA or the whatever. Great. Mm-hmm. This is how we're going to use that when we get to the next phase. So
and just make sure everyone's on the same page and understanding and good with that, And I mean,
that includes you as the advisor, right? In this,
right, yeah, and that's where me as the advisor. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not going to do it. I'll do it, but there's going to be a lot of warnings and concern in doing it. But let's put it this way: you're not going to get the best advice by saying, "Well, just look at this." It's like going to the doctor, right? You can go to the doctor and say, "I've got this pain in my side." But I only want you to look there. You're not running blood work. You're not doing all this other stuff.
Just look at it.
Just, poke it around and figure out what it is. Yeah. Well, no.
Poke it around, figure out what it is.
What's going on? I mean, no, you can't limit the doctor to do that. You got to let them do what they're going to do to figure out if you want the right diagnosis.
Right. So. Retirement planning. That's a great slogan, Phil. I think you should go that. Poke it around, figure out what it is. That's good stuff. No, you got to get involved, right? So as an advisor, you got to have your advisor involved in those conversations. And again, oftentimes that's what happens when they come down, a couple sit in front of an advisor for the first time. They really start to maybe open up more than maybe they even did have done with their spouse. Because for my last one, Phil, and this is usually the one I think this happens on, is the risk conversation. For the sake of argument, we'll go with the stereotypes, we'll go with the tropes, whatever the case might be. But maybe the husband is more aggressive and the wife is more conservative.
Absolutely.
Maybe just been going along with it, fine, whatever, pick your battle kind of arguments. But now she's got Phil there. She's got that advisor, right? She's got that third party. And she's like, you know what? I'm not quite as comfortable with that much risk after all. So how do I deal with this?
Yeah. And you have to understand that a lot of times couples are just the same or similar. Mm-hmm. But it happens more often, than not, where there is, one that's maybe more aggressive, and a lot of times maybe they've got more of the money, so they're used to it. They're comfortable with that concept of, risk and how it works. And another spouse is much more conservative, So again, we look at an overarching plan for the household. Mm-hmm. What is that risk overall, and what should it be? And then we can take that risk and divide it between the spouses, where, okay, the more risky component, if the husband, let's say, is more comfortable with that, then we can make their accounts a little bit more aggressive, to match their risk profile, and the wife a little bit more conservative, but still as a household, we're on target with a risk that makes sense in their scenario.
Yeah. So, and you've got to get them there on the same page, Phil, because to your point, if you're designing a plan based on the fact that they're not being honest with one another, it could really blow up on them a couple years down the way. And now you've reduced your time horizon and you're just complicating it. So it's great to be honest. It's really great to be honest in front of your advisor or with your advisor, saying, okay, I know we talked about this, but if I'm being truthful, I'm not that comfortable with it. I mean, this is the time to say so.
Yeah. Don't wait till, the market crashes and now you say, I told you so, we shouldn't have been,
Right. Yeah,
it just creates for bad scenarios, to let that happen then. So.
Yeah, it might make you feel good in the couples fight, but it's not going to really do your account good. So,
and it's funny to me, all the things that come up with this discussion with couples. I was just meeting with a couple the other night, and we talk about the house they have, and they had just moved here, and so what does that look like in retirement? Is this the forever house, or and she's like, no, we're selling it. We're gonna downsize, and he's like, well, no, I thought we were keeping this and we're going to have a second home. And we never talked about that. You said we were doing this. And he's like, I wasn't there for that discussion. When did we, this is just funny. It's like, okay, well, here, a point of discussion. Let's make sure we talk this through and understand, because that's a big difference, right? If we're planning for one house versus two in retirement, that can make a big difference.
And thanks for punctuating, for whoever this couple is, our conversation this week, right?
That's right. It played in very well.
Exactly the point. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that anything, it's good or bad. It's just, but we got to get it worked out ahead of time.
Right. Yeah. There's no right or wrong answer. It's understanding and working through the details ahead of time. Yeah. That's the key, is ahead of time.
He can do his magic. He can sprinkle his tax magic on there.
That's right.
Yeah, it's all right. All right, folks. So are you on the same page with your spouse? Probably. You're probably close, but as we all know, couples do vary and deviate in their thoughts and processes. So make sure that you're not stepping into some of these financial mistakes that couples can make by talking with each other and including your advisor. And if you need some help, reach out to Phil. You can find him at philstaxhacks.com. That is philstaxhacks.com. That's the podcast website, but that also links you back to his main website as well. And you can subscribe to us there on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. So we're constantly trying to improve the show and just have little good conversations that hopefully get you thinking about some of these things, so that you can go, hey, I need to discuss that with my advisor, or even get an advisor, whatever that situation looks like.
Absolutely.
So reach out to Phil. Phil, buddy, have a great day. I'll talk to you next time, okay?
You too. Take care, Mark.
Appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Phil's Tax Hacks. and other retirement facts with Phil Putney.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.